This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
Rebound back for Kucherov, right point. Kucherov, stick handles at the top of the right circle. Shoots, save made, Luukkonen, score! On the rebound, Oliver Bjorkstrand! Welcome to the Lightning!
I was just trying to stay around the net. I saw Kucherov had the puck, so I figured something would probably happen, but Gordo had a good screen and just kind of came right in front of me, so I could tap it in.
Yeah, I thought they were phenomenal. They got a lot of energy and they play the game the right way, so nice to see them get the reward.
It was so much fun. It was great to step on the ice and see the fan and the love they have for me, and it was amazing, and I really want to thank them for that.
You know, we've had so much emphasis on how we've played away from the puck and defensively, and it seemed, for one night, all the habits went out. So hopefully that's just a one-off for us. And it's like I said, it's a hard league to win in. Those are tough when you give up 5 and you still come away with the win. So we felt pretty fortunate in that regard. But we know we got to tighten things up, in 2 days.
Tighten things up for sure. Boy, that was an ugly game. The only thing good about it was the Lightning earned 2 points, which is something they had not done up until about maybe 6 weeks ago. And
defensively, it was ugly.
It was ugly.
There were parts of it that were not ugly. I mean, Jake Guentzel, a hat trick.
That was fun.
Can we call him the new guys? Is Yanni Gourde a new guy?
Yeah.
The return of Yanni Gourde was a triumphant one, as he got the assist on the game-winning goal, as we heard the clip there.
Bjorkstrand contributes.
Bjorkstrand scores the winning goal.
Credit Julian Bruce.
Very nice to see Oliver Bjorkstrand in a Lightning jersey and not on the opposing team.
That's right.
Oliver Bjorkstrand was one of the players, and there are probably through the years that Phil and I have done games together, there are probably 20 of these players. But currently in the NHL, there might be 6 or 7 players, so 20 might be actually low. It's probably more than that. Probably 6 or 7 players in the NHL that when the Lightning see them, Phil says, this guy kills the Lightning. Oliver Bjorkstrand was one of those players.
Is Brock Nelson one of them?
He says Nylander.
He's not
the Toronto Nylander.
I always felt like Nelson usually had pretty good games. Maybe not.
I'm not sure if Phil includes Brock Nelson.
Malkin usually has good games.
See, Malkin, and William Nylander scores against a lot of teams. It almost feels like these are guys that are good players, but Ovechkin has scored, 51, 52 goals against the Lightning in his career. So it's hard to say that Ovechkin kills the Lightning because Ovechkin has killed a lot of teams.
So maybe non-prominent players.
Yeah.
There
was a guy in Carolina. I got to go back and look at his name, and he would finish with 10 goals in a year. And this is when Carolina and the Lightning were in the same division. Yeah. 5 would be against the Lightning.
It's incredible.
This guy plays so well against Lightning. Bjorkstrand's been a 20-goal scorer pretty regularly throughout his NHL career, but he has found the net against the Lightning, and it was a big goal last night because it gave the Lightning the lead back, we can say, but for the first time since early in the game, and they were able to kind of by hook or by crook it across the finish line. 2 more important points in the standings, and I heard you in the post-game, Greg. I think you were talking with Eric, and you said, at the end of the year, if people look back at this game, I don't know if they will, but if they look back at this game, they're probably not going to remember the fact that the Lightning had their worst defensive performance in months, certainly weeks. Sure. I mean, there might have been a game or two in January. They gave up 6 in Boston. They gave up 5 in Toronto. Toronto game, though, was a 4-goal-against game, and then Marner scored into an empty net. The Bruins loss was 6-2. I can't remember if they had an empty netter in there. Those are not great defensive games for the Lightning. This one might have been worse, which is why I'm saying in months. I mean, I think back to that Columbus game at the start of the year. That might have been the Lightning's worst defensive game of the year. And they had a few in the first half of the year. This was definitely their worst defensive game in quite some time. But are people going to remember that? Or are they going to say, look, the Lightning had a stretch where, they went 11 games with 1 loss. Hopefully that will get extended here as they move along in March.
Not really. I mean, you've got a great memory, so you'll probably remember a little bit more, I think, than most. But you'll remember Gord, maybe in Bjorkstrand.
Yeah.
That was the game they came in.
The
and
points
it
that we're
required-
going to remember are more positive than negative, especially because they won the game.
Listen, for two periods, Vasi was not sharp.
Yeah.
Now, did his team help him out? We always have to preface that because I think that does come sometimes hand in hand. But, in fairness, we're used to seeing him cover up a lot of mistakes. It felt like the first two periods, it was just a struggle. He was fighting the puck. I'm not a goaltender coach, but just it looked like he was a little bit off. But I will tell you this, sign of a good team and a sign of a really good player is, maybe you don't have your best, but you find a way to maybe make an impact when it matters the most. And you could have a pitcher who goes out there and gives you 7 innings, but maybe doesn't have his fastball. But he finds a way to kind of give you a quality start.
Or gave up like 6 runs in the first 3 innings, but
And
figures
holds it
out a way
down.
to get the next 4.
Correct. Saves the bullpen
Under
a little
control.
bit. Yeah. And I felt like Vasi was really good in the third period. And partner, he had some big saves.
Yeah. So that is probably one of the biggest storylines in this game. I mean, we have storylines. We talked about it. Bjorkstrand, the game winner, Guentzel, the hat trick, Kucherov. Was he benched? Was he injured? I think we can explore that because he had the turnover on the 5th goal scored by Buffalo, and then he didn't see the ice again for the rest of the second period, but had the assist early in the third. So I think he played like almost the first 2 minutes in the third period without coming off the ice, and then had the goal go in. I guess he came off after that, so that was 1:40 in. So he had a 1:40 stretch, I believe, at the start of the third after not playing in the latter part of the second. But to me, if it wasn't the biggest storyline of this game, it was one of the biggest storylines in this game, and that is that Andrei Vasilevsky, how do we want to frame it? He pulled it together. He shook off an off night. It was looking like an off night. He had an off night for 2 periods, but his team kind of bailed him out. I don't want to say it was all him because you're right. We'll get into the Lightning's defensive problems. But you're looking up at the scoreboard. You're late second. It's 5-3 Buffalo. And if you're Vasi, you're like, we're going to need to rally. Well, guess what? They rallied.
Yep.
And it's 5-5 going into the third. And at that point, Vasi's like, no more. I mean, I checked, actually. The Sabres scored their 2 second-period goals on their first 3 shots in the second period. So they weren't peppering him with shots. I mean, those goals came at 9:35 and 12:40. So in the first 12 minutes and 40 seconds of the second period, the Sabres only had 3 shots on net, but 2 of them went in. At that point, Vasi had faced 15 shots and given up 5 goals. I mean, we can do the math. That's 1 out of 3, right? That's a .667 save percentage because he was stopping 2 out of 3. After that, no more. What did the Sabres finish with? 33 shots. So he stopped the next 18. The last 5 in the second period, and then all 13 in the third. So what the Lightning did not do well defensively, they didn't do a lot well defensively, or there were a lot that they didn't do well. Their rush coverage was a mess in the first couple of periods. They gave up 3 odd man chances to the Sabres on all 3. Actually, they may have given up more than 3, but the 3 that they gave up that led to goals, they had their fingerprints on all 3. Right. One was a miscue in the neutral zone. Dahlin jumps on the puck, 2-on-1, skates in, scores. The second one, Lilleberg whiffs on a one-timer and then stumbles, which I guess was a little bit of bad luck, but Alex Tuck gets a 2-on-1, scores. And on the third goal, the 2 defensemen, I think it was McDonough and Moser, bumped into each other. They were both on the same side of the ice, and that allowed Peyton Krebs to get loose in front. And Ryan McLeod, who had a couple of assists in the game, makes a good play, and Krebs is wide open. I mean, so it was kind of a 2-on-2, but it turned into a 1-on-0 because the Lightning had a miscue in terms of their coverage. But they also had turnover problems. And that's what happened on the goal Peterka scored, which got Kucherov benched, I guess. I mean, Coop acknowledged he was hit by a puck. People were telling me that, toward the end of the period, and then I heard it again in the intermission, that he was shaken up a little bit. And I'm not clear exactly when he was hit by the puck. Like, reading some of the post game, it was like, was he coming off the bench? He got hit by the puck, and then he had the turnover when he was going to the bench. I'm not entirely certain, but Coop didn't really address it head on. He just it was an unfortunate circumstance. I needed to reset the line, and Kucherov had dead leg, basically. So maybe it was a combination of all that, but Peterka doesn't score that goal if the Lightning don't have an egregious turnover. So those were the 5 goals, 4 goals, and then Thompson scores on a bomb on the power play. And I think what I would say about Vasilevsky is this. None of those saves were easy, but they were makeable. Like, he has stopped shots like that before, and he was unable to give his team saves as the Sabres got 5.
Yeah.
So what I heard from the players, and to an extent Coop as well, which to me was not totally consistent with what I was seeing, was that they had a bad first period, which I agree with defensively. And then they got better as the game went on. Well, it's true that, they only allowed 3 shots in the first 12:40 of the second. 2 went in. So that, I guess, is an improvement. But you'd have a hard time convincing me that they actually got better defensively as the game went on, because Vasilevsky, once it was 6-5, made 5 or 6 tremendous saves on glorious scoring chances that the Sabres got. So if we compare this to how the Lightning were closing out games during much of the last month plus as they've gone on this hot streak, the other team, if they were getting a chance, it was an isolated chance. The Lightning were closing out games really well. They did not close out that game well. I mean, the Sabres had, 13 third-period shots. Tuck, basically a breakaway. There was a bang-bang play in front where Benson had a chance. I think Kulik had a wide-open chance in front. Thompson had, before the goal, actually, Thompson got denied by Vasilevsky right down Broadway. I mean, it wasn't like a grade A+ chance, but it was dangerous, and you had Thompson, who has an absolute bomb of a shot. So Vasi stood tall in the third period, and I guess, the bad news for the Lightning is that he had to stand tall in the third period, but he did. He did. He pulled it together. He helped his team preserve the 6-5 lead, and what Coop said in that clip at the start of the show is absolutely right. The Lightning are going to have to be better, and hopefully this was just a one-off. Teams are going to have this. Like, you play at this high level defensively for weeks, eventually you're going to have a clunker. They had a clunker, but you know what? They won. They found a way to win. Now they just have to make sure this doesn't happen again. And the last thing I'll say is the opponent mattered. Buffalo can score. So the Lightning kind of having miscues opened the door for the Sabres, and the Sabres made plays. The Sabres can make plays. They have guys who can score. Their problem this year has been keeping the puck out of their own net, and that was also part of how the Lightning were able to win this game, because the Sabres were no great shakes defensively either. I thought Luukkonen had a very average game, honestly.
Well, you mentioned
a little bit of bad luck, too, as they had 2 pucks go in off their own players in the first period.
Yeah,
but that's part of it.
You mentioned Vasi maybe masking what the team felt like was improved play as the game wore on, making some really big saves. I didn't think the Sabres got those big saves, and I think that's part of the problem for Buffalo. You want to take a look and compare the two teams. Could you make the case that Buffalo and Tampa Bay, maybe they're not on the same level offensively, but they're in the same ballpark? I mean, those Buffalo can score. There's no question. They just can't defend. It puzzles me, partner, and I will continue to ask this question. I don't understand how teams who are that bad, and throw the Penguins in there, throw Buffalo in there, who give up just egregious scoring chances, struggle to defend, because it doesn't take talent to defend. And Lindy Ruff is a defensive guy. So you can come back to me and say, look, they've got some young players and maybe some younger players. It takes a little bit to understand their role defensively and maybe a buy-in to be defensive stalwarts. But I also feel like it's the quickest way to become a little bit more competitive game in and game out is by having more structure and just a 1-2. And these teams who give up goals like this, how are you not improving?
So, in the conversation I had with the Sabres broadcasters yesterday morning, like they know their team way better than we do.
Sure.
And one thing that they looked at as a need, they don't need more draft picks. They don't need more prospects. I mean, maybe you can make the argument the Lightning do. Right? Like, I mean, the Lightning have done just fine, but that's what Bolts Nation is saying. Like, where are our draft picks? You know, where are our high draft picks? The Sabres have a cupboard full of draft picks and prospects and players that are really talented players playing for their NHL team. What may be missing, though, is some veteran leadership. And by leadership, it's not only leadership in the room, it's what I'll call the McDonough factor, because I think Ryan McDonough does this for the Lightning. When things are coming off the rails a little bit, and when they're coming off the rails is usually defensively, you have a McDonough out there to settle things down. He can settle things down on the ice, and I think he can settle things down on the bench. And look at how the Lightning got back in the game. I mean, it was a high-scoring game, and both teams scored without a lot of shots. I mean, it was, 20 shots each, 40 total shots through 2 periods, and the teams had scored 10 goals.
Yeah.
But if you're Buffalo, all right, you're on the road, you're facing one of the hottest teams in the league. You recognize they're having a bit of an off night defensively, and you've scored 5 goals on 15 shots on Andrei Vasilevsky. You have a 5-3 lead late second. You're within 3 minutes of getting out of that period up 2. And you have a breakdown. You have a defensive mistake where they had 2 defensemen flooded to the sideboards, and Point gets the puck in front to Guentzel, and he shoots it in. And before the period ended, it was 5-5. So a 2-goal lead evaporated. How did it evaporate? Well, they had a terrible breakdown late second, leading to the Guentzel goal to make it 5-4. And then Dahlin takes a horrible penalty, completely avoidable, and lost his cool, yanked Cirelli's helmet off, got the extra minor, and the Sabres gave up the power play goal. 5-5. It's a different game, right? So in some alternate universe where you have, and I'll use this guy as an example just because Ottawa has him, and I think he's really helped them. If you have a Claude Giroux on the bench, like, all right, guys, it's 5-4. Let's take this lead into the locker room. Let's settle down. Nothing stupid. They have a great power play. Don't put them on the power play. We're in good shape. We're leading. Let's get this thing into the locker room. Let's regroup during the intermission. Let's have a good third period. Like, maybe they're missing that, right? I mean, I'm just basing it on kind of what I heard from the Sabres people, because they know their team. And like, you're like, how are you that bad defensively? Well, sometimes you can be okay defensively for a period of the game, and then you have a mistake, and then it like snowballs, right?
Sure.
And you make one mistake, and then you make another mistake, and you get running around, and like what Brian calls, kind of reeling the game back in. Teams that struggle defensively sometimes have a hard time doing that. So
I think it's fair. It's just when you don't see it, you don't see improvement metrically.
It has
through
been a
60-plus
tough
games.
stretch for the Sabres.
That's brutal. And that's it. That's an organization. I'm not going to dwell on it. That's an organization that just you can't be that bad in a cap era for that long. That's
I think it's going to be, they're going to
mismanagement.
miss the playoffs this year. I think it's going to be the 14th straight year
That's incredible.
that they've missed the playoffs. And they had some really good teams in what we'll call the late 2000s. One year when they Ottawa was the top dog, and they upset Ottawa and then lost to Carolina in the conference final in a close series. They've gone 7 games, if I'm remembering right. That was when Carolina beat Edmonton to win the Stanley Cup.
Right.
And the next year, Buffalo was the top dog, and Ottawa knocked them off. It was like turnabout is fair play, and that's when Ottawa got to the final and lost to Anaheim. And then after that, it kind of slipped away from the Sabres. I mean, they had a really good team. They had Ryan Miller in net.
Mm-hmm.
They had, at that point, I think they had Briere, Drury, Chris Drury I'm talking about, Thomas Vanek, who's in his prime.
Yeah. Some pretty good players.
They had some really good teams then, and it got away from them, and they are out in the wilderness, as we say, and they have not been able to find their way out of the wilderness, despite having all these top picks.
Yeah.
Look at all the top picks they had playing. By top, I mean like upper part of the draft, but like Dahlin was a number 1 overall pick. Owen Power. Cousins. Jack Quinn, who got hurt last night. I think he was 8th overall.
They've got some players.
They've got some players.
There's no question.
And Tage Thompson, in the right circumstance, I mean, he still almost scored 50 goals a couple of years ago, and he's probably going to end up in the 40s this year if he keeps up his current pace. Like, they've got some good players. They just have not been able to kind of connect all the dots. And they've run through coach after coach after coach after coach, it feels like, too, which probably doesn't help.
You know, it was maybe even more impressive and understandable the Lightning's helter-skelter play defensively last night. They played the majority of the game without Victor Hedman.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's a point of concern because Coop wasn't like, he's going to be fine. Sometimes he says that. It was more like, we're going to have to wait and see about Saturday.
Yeah, and I don't want to dwell too much on the injury. I didn't see what happened. I know they tried to do a little bit of an iso cam on his last shift, and maybe he kind of extended his leg a little bit as if
flexing his left leg as he was going on the bench.
But let's face it, I'm stating the very obvious. You take somebody like that out of the lineup, that's going to be hurting. And I think early on, while you could say the Lightning had the whole game to adjust to him being out, it felt like they weren't adjusting to it. You know, guys were just not comfortable. Felt helter-skelter.
Mm-hmm.
And the great equalizer in sports are injuries. And that's the one thing that you can try and plan for in terms of having depth, and the Lightning do. But I say this beyond just sports. Everybody's replaceable. Some players are harder to replace, though. And I think Hedman is in that category.
Yeah.
So impressive that the Lightning were able to kind of navigate the waters because Buffalo puts pressure on you defensively. At the same time, an injury to your world-class defenseman is something that we're obviously going to monitor. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, even starting as early as tomorrow against the Boston Bruins, which is an afternoon game.
Yeah, I mean, they have Nick Perbix, who's been scratched the last couple of games. So if Hedman is out, hopefully it's not long-term. And they have another defenseman. So they may just have to manage to be without Victor for a little bit. Yep. Hopefully it's not more than that.
Correct. So
I do want to make one point just on Gord and Bjorkstrand for different reasons. So I think one of the things we were wondering about Gord was we're going to see the same Yanni Gord, basically. And while it's true that usually players have a lot of energy when they're playing their first game with a new team or with their former team, in Gord's case, I didn't notice any slippage in terms of his quickness. He looked as quick as ever, and that's a very positive sign. Also good because he's coming off the injury, right? So you worry about timing and anything like that. He looked fine. I mean, he looked like Gord circa 2017, 2018 into the cup runs for sure. So I did not know this about Bjorkstrand until I heard Julian talk about him at the press conference that Julian had where he took questions after the trade was made. He, like Jake Guentzel, is the son of a coach. And look, I mean, statistically, it was kind of not a great night for Bjorkstrand and Gord. They were both -1, and they were out on the ice for a goal for, which means that they were out on the ice for 2 goals against. But I actually don't remember which goals they were out on the ice against that Buffalo scored, but I don't really feel that either one of them had anything to do with it. And what I noticed about Bjorkstrand, and this is something that just comes when a player's on the other team and you're seeing that player here and there, you are not as focused. First of all, I don't find that I'm as focused. I mean, I can notice a good performance, right? The show the next day, I might be like, this guy was incredible, like Werenski, right? He was incredible, et cetera, et cetera. But when you see a player shift in, shift out, and you're really paying attention to kind of what they're doing, you can really see a little bit more beyond the surface. Bjorkstrand is a very, very smart player. kind of in the Guentzel mold, because if your dad was a hockey coach, you had tutelage from an early age. And I just felt like he knew where to be. He knew how to win puck battles. He's not the biggest guy in the world. I mean, he's like a string bean. If you watch the video stream and you saw him doing an interview, or if you were at the game last night, because Gabby interviewed him, coming in, like the enter the arena interview, like he's not short, but he's not thick.
No,
he's
not.
A wiry guy.
I was surprised by that. Yeah.
And he is able to win puck battles. He's able to win puck battles because he's so smart with his positioning. Like positioning to win a puck battle, right? Like he knows how to kind of approach the puck. He knows how to use his body to wedge the guy he's battling with away from the puck. I just thought that it was a really impressive showing, and this is just the first game. What it said to me is this guy has a very high hockey IQ, which is what we've said about Guentzel. And what did he do in the goal? He's like, well, I knew Kucherov had the puck, so I figured I'd go to the net, right? And kind of a look what I found puck, and he put it in. So I thought a very good debut for both guys, even though they had to eat a -1.
That's a good observation. And, I'll credit to you, because I think you were kind of the first one to signal a bit that you think eventually he'll be on a second line.
We'll
see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, Nick Paul, the Lightning didn't have a good defensive game, but Nick Paul can play with Hagel and Cirelli. They can keep that as a unit.
He can.
I think they are going to experiment, though.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, at the very least, John Cooper probably will do that. Whether that's set in stone, I don't know. But it definitely gives you options, and you definitely feel better about the depth that you have up and down that lineup. Mm-hmm. And I think that's encouraging to see. We should let our audience know, partner, that we are taping.
Yeah, in case there's any movement.
Well,
before
and the reason
noon.
I say that, the reason why I say that, I just happened to go to NHL.com, and Dan Rosen, this was at 8 o'clock. I'm just going to read verbatim a little bit here. He said, I went to sleep shortly after 1:30 a.m. thinking I'd wake up and Mikko Rantanen would be on the move to the Dallas Stars with a new contract in place. That did not happen, but Elliot Friedman reported the Hurricanes and Stars have the framework of a trade in place.
Wow.
But it's contingent on Rantanen signing a contract with Dallas. However, this morning TSN's Darren Dreger said the Stars and Hurricanes do not have a deal as of yet because of the particulars with the contract. So obviously what you take from that is there are conversations.
Yeah. So look, Rantanen, when he was traded from Colorado, and I believe this is genuine, expressed shock.
Yeah.
That he was traded. Colorado was like, we can't reach a deal with this guy. Rantanen was like, I thought that we were going to reach. I mean, basically he was saying, I thought we were going to reach a deal. I didn't think that you were going to trade me, because we couldn't reach a deal. So if you believe Colorado, and it's not like Colorado is conservative about spending money on their top guys. They're not. But, for whatever reason, they felt they could not get Rantanen re-signed. I don't even pretend to understand what their cap situation is like and kind of what they have coming down the pike and kind of thinking long-term and all of that. But if you're going to kind of take the Avalanche's side, you're like, all right, the player was making demands that were beyond what the team was willing to give. So he gets traded to Carolina. Carolina has a different reputation. Carolina has a reputation as an organization that they kind of draw a line in the sand, and they're like, this is what we're willing to pay, and if it's not going to work out, we are happy moving on. I mean, we're not happy, but we are going to move on, and we're going to figure out another way to do it because we're not going to kind of come off this. Maybe they have a little bit of negotiating room, but they kind of have a harder line stance than some other teams in terms of how they negotiate. That's what I've heard. I'm not saying that I know this. I've never been in a negotiation with the Hurricanes. But now we have a second team that is like, we cannot get Rantanen signed, even though we gave up a lot to get him. Saw a quote from Natchez. He was asked, and he's like, yeah, maybe it would have made sense if the Hurricanes wanted to sign this guy to figure out a deal, to know they could get a deal done before they traded for him.
Sure.
Which, he's entitled to say that. They did a deal with him, but then they decided to move him. So now you're telling me there's a deal in place with Dallas contingent on a deal being done to extend Rantanen, and now there's like problems there. So is this on the Avalanche, Hurricanes, and Stars, or is Rantanen and his agent kind of setting the bar at a level that it's going to be difficult to get any kind of deal in place before he hits free agency? I don't know. I mean, by the time that we're off the air, they may have all this sorted out, and he's going to be on his way to Dallas. The Lightning see Dallas later this month. Of course, they're going to be seeing Carolina next week.
That'd be
so
an
we'll
upgrade.
see if Rantanen's on the team or not. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
sure.
It's kind of like this is now 3 teams that like are at least trying to figure out an extension with this player, and there are problems, right? Having said that, Miro Heiskanen plays for the Dallas Stars, and I'm sure that he and Rantanen, I mean, one of the reasons that we thought Carolina would be a good fit is they have all of these like Finns on their team.
Aho.
It's not, yeah, Aho and Kakaniemi.
Yeah.
And Kokaniemi, sorry. I mean,
Not to be confused with
they've
him.
had some Finns on their team.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, maybe one of the best defensemen in Finland right now plays on the Dallas Stars, even though he's hurt. So that might be kind of appealing for Rantanen to go there.
What's interesting, I think this is a great discussion, debate. Are you a better team, especially in the position Colorado was in? Because can we agree Colorado's in a win-now mode?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's fair to say. Are you better keeping Rantanen, taking your chances to see if you can win a cup, and then you let him go in the offseason? You know you're not going to be able to resign him. Do you? Because what's happening right now, so Colorado gets a pretty good player, right?
Two,
Natchez-
actually.
Two, yeah.
Because I think
mean,
Jack Drury fills a need for them because they've been missing a little bit, as we've talked about the last couple of years since they won the Cup. Colorado is a little top-heavy, maybe more than a little top-heavy. Jack Drury makes them less top-heavy.
Druin was in the line. He's, I think, been playing. I know he's been in and out a little bit, but he could be a guy that's a little bit of a difference.
But Drury came over in the deal from
that is correct.
Carolina along with Marty Natchez.
I guess what I'm saying is Natchez is a really good player. Drury's, to what you just described, very accurate. But in that instance, and, you know, there's the dynamic in the locker room within the team. The players obviously talked about what he meant to that team. Is that one of those situations where are you best served just keeping him and just taking your chances? And sometimes that's what happens. Obviously, Colorado felt we need to get some assets for him if he's not going to sign with us, and that was their decision. It's always hindsight is 20/20, but it was odd that you would let a player like Rantanen go. Like
also,
that.
they may not have known when they made the trade that the cap was going to go up $7.5 million. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think the deal came before they announced how much the cap was going up. Now, maybe, you know, teams can kind of read the tea leaves, or they're getting an indication.
I feel like there may be some inside information there, right? Like, you should, you know, hey, we're hearing.
Right. So
was
a
good
it that
chance.
They felt like they didn't, like, kind of essentially giving Rantanen what he wanted was going to put them in an untenable position in terms of building the rest of their team.
And that's fair.
And they also they have to acknowledge that they have become top heavy since they won the Cup.
That's fair.
Comes with winning the Cup, right?
Well.
Certain members of their team that provided depth left and, you know, signed other contracts and new contracts with other teams. So maybe they were concerned about that, or maybe they were just concerned about, like, we just don't want to have to pay this much. And if the cap is going up $7.5 million, the first part of that argument becomes a little less, you know, influential. Because if the cap is going up that much, you know, re-signing Rantanen, even if you give him a raise, you should have enough room, particularly if the cap is going up some more. You know, it's going up 7.5, then it's going up 8.5, then it's going up 9.5. You know, that's projected. But if they had the second kind of feeling, which is we just do not want to pay this player the amount that he is asking for, which is going to exceed the McKinnon amount, it's going to exceed the Makar amount. I'm just guessing that that's the case. that maybe they were like, this isn't going to work out. What we are willing to pay, Rantanen is not willing to accept.
And you wonder, to your point,
and then they get a guy, Natchez, who is under contract for, whatever it is, 6,
and that's a
7
fair
years.
point. That's a fair point. He's basically been a point per player since he's been there. He's been a point per player basically this year. And you wonder, look, Brock Nelson was traded to the Avs in the last 12 hours. So does that, to your point, flush their roster out a little bit more? Does it make it a little bit more complete?
I think so.
And so maybe that is, we have to look at it like that. The Avs basically have 3 players for 1. Ransonen's out. They bring 3 players in, and maybe that provides some cover for the McKinnons and the McCarrs.
That may be a rental, though, because Brock Nelson is up after this year, and it may be Nelson's choice to, I'm going to go where they pay me the most.
Well, they keep hinting at Minnesota because that's where he's from, so maybe there's – but you never know. You never know. If you want to win, and maybe that's what happens. I read that Lou Lamoriello hates to make deadline deals, but he was really holding out hope that Nelson would sign.
Yeah.
And he never did, so he then had to move him. And I guess Barzell's still out with that kneecap. A lot of injuries to star play.
Jack
Devils
Hughes
with
out
Hughes
for the year.
I mean, what do they do? I heard, is Ryan O'Reilly in play? That's you keep hearing these things,
look, I mean, I guess the one very, very, very small silver lining for the Devils is that he got hurt before the deadline.
Yeah.
So they were like, all right, we can try and address to the best we can part of this hole. I mean, you're not going to replace Jack Hughes. You're not. But, if he goes on long-term injury, if he's out for the rest of the year, he can go on long-term injury. So, I mean, they can figure out a way to add salary.
Back-to-back years he's been out, right, towards the end of the year, where he's had a significant...
Was it the end of the year last year? Well, they missed the playoffs last year. I'm trying to remember.
Injury?
This year it was the shoulder. He went into the boards.
Yeah.
In Vegas.
I feel like
that's a terrible blow.
And he's such a great player. Yeah. And that's a team that's,
they just got Markstrom back, too.
Right. So, we talk about injuries, right? We were mentioning it with Hedman.
Yeah.
It is the great equalizer in a lot of these things.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the team that can stay healthy is the one that has a good shot at, moving through the playoffs. But I think to put a bow on this a little bit, the Lightning continue to distance themselves, Dave, from the teams who are at the bottom of this wild card standing.
Yes.
And the teams who are just outside.
Detroit lost regulation to Utah at home. In other words, in Detroit. So you just want to kind of do the back of the napkin math, not even back of the napkin math, just kind of the overall picture. The surest way to get in the playoffs is to finish in the top 3 in your division. What has happened in the Atlantic, Montreal, interestingly, has gotten hot since the break. They were flailing before the break. I'm not sure if they've even lost a game since the Four Nations face-off ended, but they were pretty far down. So they've pulled themselves up a little bit, but Boston has dropped, Detroit has dropped, and Ottawa is kind of treading water as the Lightning continue to munch points. So one thing to look at is the gap between the Lightning as the third-place team, and they might actually be able to move up higher, but for the sake of this argument or point that I'm trying to make, the gap between the Lightning as the third-place team and the fourth-place team in the Atlantic. Forget about the wild card. Just look at that gap. Because if we reach the point where whoever is in fourth place is going to have a very difficult time getting to where the Lightning are, you don't have to worry about wild card, right? The other part is the gap between the Lightning and the ninth-place team. And that's if you want to factor in kind of what if the Lightning do drop into fourth in the division and they have to worry about the wild card. Well, some of these teams are scuffling, right? They are. I mean, where are the Islanders now? How much of a push are they going to be able to make? I suppose I should open the standings and take a look as we
Where are the Islanders?
Start the day.
The Islanders are at 63 points through 61 games. They are.
I mean, the Lightning are also they're at 62. They're at 78 points.
Yeah, that's huge.
So the Lightning have an 11-point lead right now on the ninth place team, the Rangers.
Yep.
even in games played. Ottawa is 11 points back with a game in hand. And we talked about Ottawa's favorable schedule down the stretch. They have a lot of home games, but they're not there yet. I mean, they still have to. They're at 33 road games, so they have 8 road games left, Ottawa, and they're an under 500 team on the road. So, yeah, Montreal is now tied with Detroit. Sorry, Montreal lost an overtime game recently. That was their last game, but I think they'd won 5 in a row prior to that. So they're trying to make a push, but making a push will get them closer to the teams around them. They're still 12 points behind the Lightning. 12 points, like, that's a cavern. That's a huge gap. You have to factor in how many teams do they have to leapfrog to get to the Lightning. So, like, look, if you're the Lightning, just keep winning, keep getting points. You know, you're putting pressure on Toronto, you're putting pressure on Florida. Keep doing what you're doing. But as we approach kind of the home stretch here, the last 20 games, you know, if the Lightning continue to create more of a gap between themselves and either the 4th place team in the division and or the 9th place team in the conference, they're going to be that much closer to clinching a playoff spot.
Is Brad Marchand going to be traded?
I would be surprised. I mean, the Bruins did make a move. They traded Brazo, who
big guy,
was kind of a depth guy for them. They traded him to Minnesota.
Couple players.
Jacob Lauko, who used to play for the Bruins, is back. And then this Husnudinov, whose name I had to learn this year because I hadn't seen him play before. But he got into both games against the Lightning when they saw Minnesota at the start of the year. He got moved as well. So we'll see those guys presumably tomorrow and the following Saturday because the Lightning and Bruins play in Boston. But it kind of feels like the Bruins have kind of raised the white flag a little bit. But I don't know. I mean, do they have to trade Brad Marchand? I don't think it would be Marchand's preference to go. I think he'd like to stay in Boston.
I think he wants
finish
to
his career there.
I just, look, Steven Stamkos can be not on the Lightning anymore.
Right.
Brad Marchand doesn't have to be with the Boston Bruins his whole career, I guess. You know, that's how I kind of look at it.
Yeah.
Jay says, felt like the worst defensive structure game since the 7-6 overtime loss to Columbus. Good effort to dig deep and get 2 points. Nice to see Bjorkstrand score right away. Angry Kucherov on the bench was mildly hilarious, not going to lie. Will the Flyers and Penguins sell their biggest pieces? Will the Devils, Kings, and or Leafs make significant additions? The Stars getting Rantanen maybe? How will the Hurricanes pivot from whatever the hell they're doing? Any surprise moves out of nowhere? Besser?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think I said at the start of the show, Jay, it may have been their worst defensive game since that game at Columbus. They were very porous in that game. They had some other games at the start of the year that weren't great. That Columbus game, I think, was worse than what we saw last night. It was. But, I mean, the dynamic was kind of the same. We talked about Columbus as a high-scoring team that gave up a lot of goals when the Lightning saw them earlier in the week. Buffalo is a high-scoring team, not as high as Columbus, but can score, that gives up a lot of goals. They give up more goals than Columbus. The Lightning had a tough night defensively, and it happened to come against a team that can make you pay if you make mistakes. But in both those games, because the Lightning got a point from that loss in Columbus, give up 7 or 6 in regulation, you're not expecting to get a point out of a game like that. They were able to score their way to a point. Last night they were able to score their way to 2 points. As far as what else he had in there, I don't profess to be an expert on kind of the trade deadline and what teams might do and what they're looking for. I do still think it's a seller's market.
Yeah.
Even though we may be seeing more teams being willing to sell. I mean, the Bruins are kind of selling, and maybe the Islanders are too. But he asked about Carolina. I think if Carolina does trade Rantanen, first of all, they're not just giving Rantanen away. If they trade Rantanen, they're going to be getting assets back. It's just they're shuffling the deck again, and they're still a good team. So they remind me on some level. This is probably not a great comparison for 2 reasons, but they remind me on some level of the Patriots under Belichick. And where I'm going with this is it felt like the Patriots didn't really get emotionally attached to players who helped them win. And they're like, we can find replacements and we're still going to be good. That part is true with Carolina. Carolina under Brind'Amour has been a very consistently high-end team, especially in the regular season.
In the regular season.
But, I mean, they haven't just gone out in the first round of the playoffs either. And like, Gossespierre goes there, does well. You know, like, Calvin DeHaan goes there and does well. Ian Cole goes there and does well. And then they move to other teams, and they aren't quite able to be as dynamic or kind of fit into as a cog in the wheel as they – I mean, Ian Cole's been a good player. I'm not saying that. But, like, these players go into Carolina, and they play a very different system. And it's like the players that go there are just able to slot right in, it feels, and Carolina doesn't really miss a beat. So from that standpoint, they remind me of the Patriots, because the Patriots are like, yeah, this guy's a good player, but, you know, we can move on from him. We'll find somebody else. And they'd find somebody else, or maybe multiple else's, and they would slot in too. Two big differences.
Rod Brind'Amour,
the Patriots
not Bill Belichick.
had Brady, right? I mean, look, I think Brind'Amour is a great coach, but
I think
the Patriots had Tom Brady.
Yeah.
And I don't think the Hurricanes have a GOAT, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody even in that conversation. Second part is the Patriots won championships, and Carolina hasn't. But from the standpoint of not being overly emotionally committed to players,
fair. That part's fair.
There is a comparison there. So you're like, all right, if they move Rantanen, they are going to be getting assets back, and they are a good team. They are a good team. With Rantanen or without Rantanen, meaning somebody else. Or maybe they get two players for Rantanen. We'll see. For them, it's going to be, show me what you got in the playoffs, and can you get to the final? A couple times they've gotten to the conference final. They're usually into the second round, and they end up losing. They're missing a big play. They're missing a big save. Series goes 7. They're right there.
Yeah.
But they have a chance to close out the series. They don't do it. Then they're in a game 7. The other team makes a big play. Like, that's kind of been it for Carolina.
See, I thought you were going to make the comparison Carolina-Columbus when we had the narrative around the league with nobody wanted to be in Columbus. Now, that was nixed because that was maybe one or two players. But I think Carolina's starting to get a little bit of that. Okay,
Nate just signed there, though. Nate just was willing to be there for 6-7 years. I keep saying that. Like, I think he signed his extension, like this year was the first year of the extension. So beyond this year, whatever he's got left on the deal. But, I mean, he laid his roots in Carolina. They were the team that decided to trade him.
Correct.
Right?
Rantanen and Guentzel. It doesn't, obviously – more rentals, it looks like. More rentals. And
look, for Jake Guentzel, so I've never had a conversation with Jake Guentzel about this. I probably will never have a conversation with him about it.
Maybe we can have on the show on Monday.
I don't know him well enough to be able to ask this question. But was it that he was willing to re-sign in Carolina, and Carolina either didn't offer what he wanted or they were late to the table? I mean, they had a GM shift there too, because wasn't Don Waddell there?
Yeah, right.
And now he's in Columbus, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And, they had that turnover there, and maybe they were late to the table with Guentzel, and he's like, I'm here. Like, talk to me.
Yeah.
And if I'm remembering right, kind of how all that unfolded, Carolina maybe let an opportunity slip through their fingers. I don't mean to lay it all on Carolina, but it's not that Guentzel was like, yeah, I like my time here, but see you later.
Bye-bye.
I think it was more complicated than that. And then when we got closer to July 1, and he's like, all right, I don't have a deal. Let me see what's out there. And the Lightning came calling. So.
And when the Lightning call, you answer.
Right, but it's not like, so you're kind of posing the question, do players not want to be in Carolina? And we don't know what's going on with this Rantanen situation. But if Carolina, opened Fort Knox for Rantanen, you'd be like, yeah, I love Carolina. I mean, it may just be about the contract, right?
Well, but to your point, I don't know if they ever do that. You made the comparison with the Patriots. Maybe they're just a franchise. They've got a budget. They got to stick to it. They play a certain way. It's not for everybody. Let's put it that way. It may not be for everybody. That's all I'm saying. Not saying they don't have good players. They do. Of course they do.
Yeah.
It sounds like Raquel is still the prize out there.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm reading is that Dubas is seeing all of these trades, and apparently the asking price for Raquel is just astronomical. Like, you've got to give me a first-round pick.
You may not get a dance partner then.
You may not. But he's like, I want a prospect, and I want a young player from your roster who can play.
Mm-hmm.
Because, to your point, people believe it is a seller's market right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of the draft picks that are going. I mean, I can't tell you who's the best prospect that has gone back in a trade where you're kind of like, whoa.
Right.
I think it's more about the volume of picks that have been thrown around. And people are just going, how can you give a 2026, 27 first-round pick?
And you can answer this better than I can, although I guess I could go to Puckpedia and take a look. You know, we talked about teams like Buffalo and then Arizona when Arizona was Arizona. Yeah. Now is Utah. Things may look a little different. But there is such a thing as having too many picks. It's like you can't pick. Every player you pick is not going to end up on your team, even if all of those players are really good players, right? Like there are only so many slots that you can fill. You have 23 in the NHL on your roster. And if you've got like 12 picks in the draft and you're like, whoa, we got all these picks. Like, yeah, some you're going to swing and miss on. But I think it is possible to have too many picks. And maybe Buffalo's in that situation. They're like, you know what? We're holding on to Alex Tuck. Because what we're going to get from Tuck in a trade or for Tuck in a trade, we don't need more high-end draft picks. We have those guys. We need a guy who's, I mean, I don't know why his name was even floated, but be that as it may. The Penguins, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Penguins are in a different boat because they had a bare cupboard for years. So maybe it does make sense for Pittsburgh to start accumulating more 100%. Draft picks and more prospects.
And Guentzel was the start of that. You know, Guentzel was the start of that. 3 players, then they traded Bunting to Nashville. They get a player back. Jay says, Greg, please do not yell at me about draft picks. Drafting is still incredibly vital to building most cup winners. You need cheap entry-level contracts to balance out your cap and provide you youth infusion. Getting mad at me for a different opinion is wild. Well, I don't think I was getting mad at you. I think it was the...
No, you were getting mad.
Yeah, I was definitely getting mad. It wasn't necessarily pointed at Jay. It was the narrative out there that the Lightning are always giving up these draft picks. And people just... I think you get colorblind. I think you aren't giving the Lightning the benefit of the doubt that they have a plan in place. The Lightning are in a position to win now. So you are going to be trading away a lot of those draft picks to win now. Mm-hmm. It's different than to what we just said about the Pittsburgh Penguins, who need to get a lot of younger players into that system because what they have right now at the core isn't working, even though Sidney Crosby's still playing at a very high level. The Lightning aren't in that position. And what we have complimented on the Lightning is they've had an infusion of young players come in that have helped them. Make no mistake, Jay. That's why I said Gonsalves. You've had Lilleberg, Crozier. These guys have allowed the Lightning the opportunity. If you want to put Chafee in there, he can, a little older, but comes in and complements your star players. So the Lightning are able to trade away draft picks because their core is still young, and they are bringing in guys from other teams, by the way, who are going to have terms still that don't necessarily force you to bring up younger players from the minor league system to have that infusion of entry-level contracts. Mm-hmm. They have a couple. It doesn't need to be littered up and down. And that'll probably, look, next year is going to be the same thing. Geeky, Duke, Howard, Crozier. I just named 4 players that potentially may have a role on this team next year. That's a pretty good infusion, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Stacked on what you saw this year.
So it has not, Jay, as you know, it has not only gone in one direction for the Lightning, where they are trading younger players or the idea of a younger player in a draft pick for a more experienced player. I think the Sergachev deal is a great example of them trading a player who is older, not old, but older, and getting 2 younger players in return. So one is a true prospect, Geeky. The other is a more established guy, Moser, but it's still younger than Sergachev. Right. So I did not get mad at your comment, Jay, just for the record, because I agree. Like, draft picks are important.
Yeah.
But the Lightning have shown that, first of all, they can draft beyond the first round and find NHLers. I'm going to hit on all of them, but they've hit on enough over the course of this run that they've been on, where they've been in the upper echelon of the NHL. And they also have found other ways to get those sorts of players that you just referenced, which are players at the beginning of their career with basically affordable contracts, like in their entry-level deals. I mean, the Lightning have some guys they're paying, let's just say, a lot, right? But if you look at the breakdown of their roster in terms of the salary, they have probably just as many players that are making close to or slightly more than the league minimum.
Right.
And they aren't all younger players. I
Yeah.
mean, Gergensons, Glendening, Chafee. I mean, Chafee's what, 25, 26?
Yeah.
You know, AC Mob before he was moved was making what, 800,000.
Right.
So it's not only the like 20, 21-year-olds that are on those friendly deals, right?
Look
the
how
point for the
much-
Lightning is to build a good team.
Yes.
And they have found ways to do that in the absence of having first-round picks. And maybe that emboldens them to say, you know what, we don't actually need these first-round picks. If the first-round pick is going to be mid to late round, again, the thing to keep in mind is if things happen to go in the direction that they are not expecting and they happen to get a lottery pick, by lottery I'm saying top 10, in this deal they just made with Seattle, they get to keep that pick. They will get the top 10 pick.
Yep.
If it comes to that.
You have guys like Hagel and Paul who were playing very well before they signed contracts, and now with the cap going up, those contracts are going to look better. And I think you have to keep that in perspective. There's different ways to build a team. The Lightning, the Lightning are in a different position to build a team now than they were 10 years ago, when they had that infusion of the Tyler Johnsons, the Palots, the Killorns. That enabled them, partner, to kind of get to where they are now. But not all of those players were going to stay. And the Lightning were able to replace those players with different guys, whether it be a trade, whether it was certain guys who grew into bigger roles, and draft picks.
Yeah.
And they've been able to do that. Let's get to one more question here. Anthony says, well, that was ugly. On the bright side, new guys looked very good. Vasi found his game. I'm not so confident in Lilleberg going into the series with Florida with that pressure around the boards and his puck skills. But you don't want to lose him or Perbix. Tough call.
I think they are happy with Lilleberg. I'm happy with Lilleberg. I think Lilleberg is taking a step forward this year. Like, I understand, there are certain players that, there are certain players on D that probably look smoother in terms of their skating than Lilleberg, and they're a little more poised with the puck, and that's probably not the right way of putting it, but certain guys just have puck poise, like at the very, very highest end. You're talking about Werenski and Makar, right? Talking about defensemen. Lilleberg, I'm not sure that like puck poise is necessarily like one of his greatest strengths, but he can handle the puck. He doesn't need to have Makar like puck poise. What he does is he's positionally sound. He is not afraid to separate a guy from the puck. He understands the position, and he makes, like, of the percentage of plays that he makes, like 19 out of 20 of them are the right play. He got unlucky last night. He stumbled, right?
Right.
That was probably of the three odd mans the Lightning gave up in the first period, the one that really, it was just bad luck, honestly. It wasn't like they made a huge mistake, but that's hockey. It happens. I think Lilleberg has taken a step forward this year, and I think he understands what he needs to do to have success in the NHL, and he does it.
Yeah.
The Lightning don't have, so, would we say that Werenski or Makar, and I'm just using them as an example because they are the elite of the elite in terms of skating and puck poise and kind of navigating with the puck. Lilleberg can do it. I wouldn't say it's a strength of his. What is a strength of his is playing good, solid positional play and separating guys from the puck. I'm not sure that Werenski or Makar are as good as Lilleberg at separating guys from the puck, understanding that they are two of the best defensemen in the NHL.
Sure.
So Lilleberg has his own kind of toolbox of things that he does well, and he has had a good year. So look, I mean, I'm not quite sure where Anthony is going with that, but I've seen nothing from Lilleberg that would give me pause about him playing well in a playoff series.
No. And look, he's a guy that you want to get playoff experience too, so he's going to play. And you want him to play because he's going to get better, and that's usually what happens. All right, so like we said, we taped today, so if anything happens and you're wondering, hey, why isn't Dave and Greg talking about Ricard Raquel coming to the Lightning?
Yeah,
that's
with
why.
the Lightning,
that's why.
really.
Yeah, that's why. And if something really drastic happens, maybe we'll hop on later to do something. But as of now, this is where we are. The Lightning take on the Bruins tomorrow, 3 o'clock start. It's actually a little later than that. We'll be on the airwaves at 2:30.
Yeah,
and
you have a longer pregame show because it's an ABC game.
Just
3 in a row for the Lightning on national
good.
TV because the Carolina road game is ESPN Plus, I believe.
Gotcha. Yeah, good note. And so we will have that, and then we'll be back at it on Monday.
Yeah,
recapping what we saw Saturday, and
probably
recapping the draft or the trade deadline.
Yes, and Saturday will end this kind of home-heavy stretch for the Lightning that really started when they had that 5-game homestand near the end of January. It started near the end of January, and then as we've talked about, they'll begin next week a stretch of 6 out of 7 on the road. That is going to be a test for the Lightning. Let's see how they navigate through it. But March is scheduled, even though I've seen kind of the in the notes, 15 games in 29 days. This is different than what they had in January because they are not playing as many road games. And really the 6 out of 7 stretch on the road is the one really kind of busy road stretch. But even then, unlike January, I mean, they only have one back-to-back left all year. And that's, on this stretch of 6 out of 7 on the road. Whereas in January, they were getting lots of back-to-backs. So it's a little bit less of a heavy lift, but it's still a challenging stretch. Let's see how they navigate through it. But first things first, Boston at Amalie Arena on Saturday afternoon. Let's see if they can close out the homestand on a good note.
Partner, great job this week, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
Talk to you tomorrow.
You got it. Thanks, everybody who listened. Thanks to Steve Versnick, Jared Johnson. And again, all of you guys, I'm not yelling at you. We love you. That's true. Keep them coming.
We love all the comments.
We love all the comments. Hit us up there at Bolts Radio. I'm Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.